Here's something nobody talks about enough. The most damaging betrayals in a relationship are never the dramatic ones. They're not the explosive fights, the screaming matches, the obvious red flags you can point to and say, "There, that's the moment." No. The most damaging betrayals are the quiet, patient ones. The ones built over months or years by a man who looked at the woman who loved him and made a calculation, a cold, deliberate calculation that she was manageable, that her love was an asset he could leverage, that her trust was a door he could walk through and back out of whenever it suited him. These are 3 stories from Threads about 3 of those men. 3 different women, 3 different situations, one truth that runs through all of them like a wire. The moment a man decides the woman beside him is not paying close enough attention, that is the moment he has already lost. He just doesn't know it yet.
Story 1. He was planning to propose to someone else. The date he chose was our 5-year anniversary. I found the ring on a Sunday. I made a decision by Monday morning. At 5 years for a receipt on Threads. Part 1. The 5 years. Camille met Derek at a house party when she was 23. He was the person at the party who was actually listening, not scanning the room, not performing, genuinely listening when she talked. That was the thing she always came back to when she described how it started. He made her feel heard in a room full of noise. She was gone before the night was over. They dated for 5 years, and Camille, being honest with herself in her Threads post, says those 5 years were not all bad. There were real things, real trips, real laughs, real nights where they stayed up until 2 a.m. talking about what they wanted their lives to look like. She believed him. She believed in the version of them he presented to her and to the people around them, consistently and convincingly for 5 years. The thing she did not know, the thing she had no reason to suspect, was that 18 months into their relationship, Derek had reconnected with a woman named Isla, an ex from college, someone he'd described to Camille once, briefly, as a whole other chapter. They'd run into each other on a mutual friend's birthday, and according to what Camille later pieced together, what began as reconnecting had become over the following 3.5 years a parallel relationship that Derek had maintained with the specific skill of someone who had decided that 2 lives were better than the risk of choosing. He had not been honest with either of them. He had told Isla that he and Camille were on and off, that it was complicated, that he was working through it. He had told Camille that he was ready, that he was all in, that he was just waiting for the right moment to make things official. The right moment, apparently, had been carefully scheduled, their 5-year anniversary. He was going to propose to Isla that weekend. He had booked a restaurant. He had bought a ring. The ring was in a box inside a coat pocket in the back of his closet. Camille found it on a Sunday while looking for a scarf. Part 2. Sunday into Monday. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters for this story. Camille did not stay calm. She did not make tea and open a spreadsheet. She did not compose herself and formulate a legal strategy. She sat down on the floor of the closet with that ring box in her hands, and she cried, hard, ugly, the kind of crying that comes from 5 years compressing into a single moment for about 45 minutes. She called her older sister, Bree. She was barely coherent on the phone. Bree drove over. They sat on Camille's kitchen floor together, and Bree did not try to fix anything. She just sat there and she let Camille be as broken as she needed to be, which was exactly right. Then, at some point around midnight, something shifted, not into cold strategy, not into a plan, just into clarity. Camille described it in her post as the feeling of realizing you're done. Not angry done, not revenge done, just done. The way a door closes, the way a chapter ends not with an exclamation point, but with a period. She asked Bree one question. How do I make sure the right people know the truth before he gets to write his version of it? And that question is what she spent Monday on. Part 3. What Monday looked like. Camille knew Derek was proposing to Isla that coming Saturday. She knew this because she had, after finding the ring, gone through his phone while he slept. Not proud of it, she said in her post, but not going to pretend she didn't. She found the restaurant reservation, the date, the whole thing. She had 5 days. She did not want a confrontation. She did not want a scene. What she wanted was to leave the relationship on her terms, with the truth intact, before Derek had the chance to smooth everything over with the particular talent he had for making complicated things sound simple. So she did this. She wrote a message, one message, to Isla, not accusatory, not dramatic. She introduced herself, explained the situation as she understood it, told her the date of the upcoming proposal, and attached 3 years' worth of photos that established beyond any interpretation that her relationship with Derek was very much ongoing and very much real. Weekend trips, holidays, his family's Christmas, a photo of Derek asleep in Camille's bed from 11 days earlier. She sent it, and then she put her phone down and went to bed. Then she packed a bag. Not everything, just enough. She left Derek's apartment keys on the kitchen counter with a note that said only, "I found the ring. I know what Saturday is. I hope you understand why I'm not here when you read this." She left before he woke up. She stayed at Bree's apartment. What happened next was not something she planned or engineered. Isla, upon receiving the message, did not respond to Camille. She had no obligation to, but she did confront Derek that same Monday evening. And Derek, presented with evidence that was impossible to explain away, did what men in that position often do. He tried to explain it anyway. The explanation, by multiple accounts from people who heard it secondhand, was a masterpiece of rationalization that satisfied nobody. Isla did not go to the restaurant on Saturday. Derek went alone. He sat at a table for 2 at a restaurant he had booked for a proposal by himself. And as far as anyone knows, he did not speak to a soul about what he had expected that evening to be. Camille was at Bree's, eating takeout, watching a movie she'd wanted to see for months that Derek kept saying he'd get around to watching with her. She posted the story 6 months later. The response was, in her words, completely unhinged in the best way. The most liked comment, and this tells you everything you need to know about why this story hit the way it hit, simply said, "The fact that she cried on the closet floor first. She's not a robot. She's a person who hurt and then decided. That's so much more powerful than if she'd been cold." Camille replied, "I cried for 45 minutes. Then I got up. The crying was part of it." That reply got 62,000 likes. I want to stop here for a second, because if Camille's story is already in your chest a little, that mix of hurt and anger and that strange quiet satisfaction at the end, then you already know what kind of channel this is. Venture and Karma is here every week with real people, real decisions, real outcomes. If you're not subscribed, do it right now. Tap the button, hit the bell. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss a single story. Okay, story 2. This one is different. This one is slower, and that's what makes it devastating. Story 2. He controlled every dollar for 9 years. He had no idea I'd been running my own books the whole time. From @MyMoneyNeverLeft on Threads. Part 1. The Architecture of Control. When people hear financial control in a marriage, they sometimes picture something obvious. A man who screams about every purchase, who snatches credit cards, who stands over receipts like an auditor. What Diane experienced for 9 years was nothing like that. It was quieter, more elegant, more deniable. She met her husband, Thomas, at 27. He was established, a decade older, already financially stable. with a home he owned and a career in commercial real estate that had been good to him. When they got together, there was a natural gravitational pull toward his infrastructure. His house was bigger, his income was consistent, his systems, how he organized their finances, how bills were paid, how accounts were structured, were already in place. It started with what felt like sense, Thomas suggesting they combine finances for efficiency, joined accounts, his name as primary on everything for simplicity, the household expenses coming from a shared account that he oversaw and she contributed to. Her salary, which was real and respectable, she worked in graphic design, went into the joint account from which she could draw a monthly personal budget that he set. She had a budget inside her own marriage for her own money. When she pressed on it early in the marriage, Thomas was always reasonable about it. He had a spreadsheet. He showed her the numbers. He talked about financial planning and long-term goals and the importance of structure. He was never angry. He was never loud. He was just thoroughly, persistently in charge, and he made it feel like stewardship rather than control. Over time, Diane's relationship with money in her own household became strange. She felt vaguely embarrassed spending what was, by any measure, her own earned income. She found herself justifying purchases to him that she should not have needed to justify. She stopped buying things she wanted and started buying things she could explain. She did not have visibility into their investments, their retirement accounts, and several financial instruments Thomas described as too complicated to go into right now. She trusted him. That was the word she used repeatedly in her Threads post, trusted. The thing about trust is that it can be exploited so slowly you never feel the moment it started happening. Part 2. The account she didn't mention. Here is the part of Diane's story that the comments section could not stop talking about. 18 months into her marriage, so roughly 8.5 years before her Threads post, Diane had a conversation with her own mother. Her mother had grown up in a time when women's financial independence was not always possible, and she had opinions about it. Specifically, she told Diane, "I don't care how solid your marriage is, keep something that is only yours, not for the marriage, for you." Diane, at 29, had listened, and she had quietly opened a personal savings account at a separate bank from any account Thomas had visibility into. She did not hide it aggressively. She simply did not mention it. It was small at first, a few $100s a year, moved carefully and incrementally from small freelance design projects she took on occasionally, billed directly to a personal PayPal that predated the marriage. Money she had earned on weekends, on evenings, on lunch breaks doing logo work and brand collateral for small businesses she found through word of mouth. Over 9 years, that account had grown to just under $40,000. $40,000 built a few hundred at a time in an account her husband had never asked about and therefore never discovered. She had also quietly taken 2 online courses in business finance and bookkeeping over those years. She told Thomas they were design certification courses, which was vague enough to be technically not a lie. She understood her own financial situation, their joint finances, their investments, their exposure, far better than Thomas realized, because while he managed the money, she had been studying it for years. By the time Diane understood that her marriage was not going to survive, and the realization came from not a single event, but from the accumulated weight of 9 years of quiet diminishment, she wasn't starting from zero. She was starting from $40,000, a portable career, a complete picture of their marital assets, and a mother who had told her the right thing at 29. Part 3. The divorce Thomas did not see coming. Thomas initiated the conversation about divorce. This is the detail that Diane's comments section found most poetic, and I think they were right to. He came to her one evening and told her in the careful, managed way he did most things that he had been unhappy for some time, that he'd been seeing a therapist, and that he thought they had grown in different directions. He had, he told her, already spoken to an attorney to understand his options. He seemed to believe this would be a shock. Diane looked at him across their kitchen, in the house that was in his name, with the joint account she'd contributed to for 9 years, and said, "Okay, I've already spoken to an attorney too." He blinked. "When?" She said, "3 months ago. I've been waiting to see if you'd get there yourself." The attorney she'd spoken to had prepared her well. She understood exactly what she was entitled to from 9 years of marriage: a portion of the appreciated value of the home, equitable distribution of retirement accounts, and a fair settlement of the joint assets. Because Thomas had controlled the financial narrative so long, he had made a critical error that many controlling spouses make. He assumed she didn't understand the finances. He had therefore not been as careful as he might have been. She understood everything. She had understood it for years. The settlement negotiation took 4 months. At the end of it, Diane received half the appreciated equity of the home, half of 3 retirement accounts, and a cash settlement. Combined with her personal account, the $40,000 her husband had never known about, she left the marriage with enough to put a down payment on a small house in a city she'd always wanted to live in, start her own freelance design studio officially, and go to the coast before she did anything else. The freelance studio now has 4 full-time clients and 2 employees. She named it after her mother's middle name. In her Threads post, she included exactly 1 line about Thomas's reaction when her attorney produced the full accounting of her personal assets during settlement discussions. He looked at the number like he was seeing it for the first time. He was, but I'd seen it every month for 9 years. That line was quoted in the comments 8,400 times. The post got 620,000 likes.
Okay, I need you to stay with me, because I have been building towards story 3, and I need you to understand something before we get into it. The first 2 stories are about women who were wronged in their closest relationships and found their way out with grace. And that is real and that is powerful. But story 3 has a detail, one specific detail that doesn't come until about halfway through, that completely changes the shape of the entire story you think you're hearing. I am not going to spoil it. I'm going to let it hit you the way it hit the 800,000 people on Threads who read it and immediately screenshotted it and sent it to someone. Are you ready? Because this one will stay with you. Story 3. He was having an affair with my best friend for 2 years. When I found out, I didn't confront either of them. I waited for their wedding day. Part 1. The 3 of them. Naomi had 2 constants in her adult life. The first was her husband, Ryan. The second was her best friend, Priya. They had met Priya at the same time, a mutual friend's birthday 8 years before Naomi's Threads post. Ryan and Naomi had been together for 2 years at that point, and Priya had slotted into their lives with the natural ease of someone who belongs. She and Naomi had the specific chemistry of a best friendship that feels inevitable, the kind where you finish each other's references, where you can sit in silence without it being strange, where one phone call after something happens always starts with, "Okay, I need to tell you something." Priya was a bridesmaid at Naomi and Ryan's wedding 3 years into knowing them both. She gave a toast that made half the room cry. She used the phrase, "They make each other better people," and Naomi, hearing it, had believed it completely. For 5 years of Naomi's marriage, Priya was a constant presence. Dinners, holidays, vacations. She dated a few people over those years, none of them seriously. She was one of those people who seemed to have an infinite capacity for being everyone else's person, while being genuinely private about her own needs. Naomi loved her without reservation. Which is why, when things started to feel slightly off, not wrong, just slightly off, Naomi's mind did not go anywhere near Priya.
Part 2. The slightly off. The slightly off feeling is the hardest thing to describe, and Naomi spent several paragraphs in her post trying to name it. It wasn't that Ryan was distant. He was, if anything, more present than usual, more attentive. He started taking an interest in Naomi's work in a way that felt slightly performed. He became, in one word, deliberate, like a man making sure he left no negative space. The slightly off with Priya was different, subtler. It was the first time in their friendship that Naomi sensed a frequency she couldn't read. Moments where Priya's response to something was slightly faster than it should have been, or where a silence sat a half-second too long. Small, barely there irregularities in someone Naomi knew so well that she could detect them even when she couldn't name them. She noticed, and then she noticed that she was noticing, and then she did something that she says she is still not entirely sure was right or wrong. She started paying attention very carefully without saying anything to anyone. She was not looking for evidence. She was just watching two people she loved and trying to understand a frequency she couldn't tune. The moment she understood came from the smallest possible thing. Ryan had a habit, a completely ordinary domestic habit, of humming a specific song under his breath when he was in a good mood. It was an older song, not particularly popular, something Naomi had introduced him to early in their relationship. He'd been doing it so long she'd stopped hearing it. One evening, she and Priya were in the kitchen together when Ryan was in the next room. Ryan started humming, and Priya, without breaking stride in their conversation, without looking up from what she was doing, smiled, just slightly, just for a moment, the automatic reflex smile of someone hearing something that makes them feel good, the song that nobody else they knew would know. Naomi kept talking. She made sure her face didn't change. She went home that night and didn't sleep. Part 3. What she did and did not do. She did not confront Ryan. She did not confront Priya. She did not look through phones, emails, or shared calendars. What she did was she thought carefully for about 3 weeks about what she actually wanted, not what the situation entitled her to, not what was fair, what she actually wanted for herself going forward. And she realized something that she says took her completely by surprise. She was not destroyed. She was, and she used this word deliberately and then walked it back and then used it again, relieved. The slightly off feeling of the past several months had been creating a low-grade dread that she hadn't fully named until she named its source. The moment she understood what was happening, the dread resolved into something cleaner. Grief, yes, but also clarity. She had, she realized, been doing significant emotional labor in her marriage for about 2 years, working, adapting, accommodating, adjusting, and she had attributed all of it to her own imperfections. She had thought, I need to be better at this. I need to try harder. I need to show up more. She had never thought, something is wrong here that isn't mine to fix. Understanding the truth didn't just tell her about Ryan and Priya. It told her about the last 2 years of her own experience, and what it told her was that she had been working very hard to sustain something that had already ended on someone else's terms. She spent 3 weeks making decisions quietly. She met with a divorce attorney. She organized her finances. She had 2 long calls with her sister. She grieved privately and seriously and without performance. And then she waited. She waited for a specific moment. She had 5 weeks to wait.
Part 4. The moment she waited for. 4 weeks after the night in the kitchen, Ryan told Naomi he needed to talk to her. He sat her down. He was serious and prepared and clearly had practiced what he was going to say. He told her he had fallen in love with someone else. He told her he was sorry. He told her the person was someone they both knew. He did not immediately say who. Naomi looked at him and said very quietly, "Is it Priya?"
The expression on his face, described by Naomi as the specific look of a person whose carefully prepared speech has been removed from his hands, lasted about 4 seconds. "How long have you known?" She said, "Long enough. I need you to listen to me now." She told him she had already spoken to an attorney. She had already organized the documentation. She had already made the decisions she needed to make, and that she did not need this conversation to make them. She had only been waiting for him to initiate it so they could proceed without her having to drag it out of him. He started to explain. She stopped him. "I don't need the explanation," she said. "I need you to understand that this is the last conversation we're going to have about what happened. Everything else goes through the attorneys." He asked if she was angry at Priya. She said, "I'm not angry at anyone anymore. I was. I'm done now." She stood up, picked up her bag, and walked out of her own house to her sister's apartment 2 miles away. Now, here is the detail I told you about. Here is the thing that made 800,000 people put their phones down and stare at the ceiling. 4 weeks after that conversation, Naomi received, because she was still technically on Ryan's family's shared email chain from years prior, an administrative oversight nobody had corrected, a forwarded event invite. Ryan and Priya had gotten engaged. They had apparently been planning this for some time. The wedding was set for 6 months out. Fast, some people in their social circle noted, but Ryan and Priya were clearly done waiting. Naomi read the invite. She forwarded it to her attorney for documentation purposes. She did not reply to the chain. Then she went to the wedding. Part 5. Why she went. I know what you're thinking, and I need you to sit in that question for a second, because Naomi addressed it directly in her post, and what she said is the most precise and interesting thing in this entire story. She went because Priya's mother asked her to. Priya's mother, a woman named Anjali, who had known Naomi for 8 years and had no full picture of what had happened, called Naomi with the specific, nervous graciousness of a mother trying to hold a complicated situation together. She asked if Naomi would come. She said it would mean a great deal to her. She said she hoped there could be peace. Naomi, who had liked Anjali for 8 years and who had done nothing wrong, said yes. She went to the wedding. She sat in the back. She was dressed beautifully, not as a statement, but because she was the kind of person who dressed well when she was at full strength, and she was at full strength. She was civil to everyone who approached her. She wished Anjali a warm hello. She did not speak to Ryan. She did not speak to Priya. Priya saw her from across the room at the reception, and by multiple accounts from people who were present, went very still for a moment. Naomi did not stay long. She had a glass of water, said goodbye to Anjali, and left. She said later in the Threads post, which she wrote 4 months after the wedding, that the reason she went had nothing to do with Ryan or Priya. It was for Anjali, and it was for herself. She wanted to know that she could walk into that room and feel nothing but the clean air of someone who had already finished their grief and moved on. She wanted to prove to herself that she was free. I walked in and I felt nothing towards them, not anger, not sadness, just the specific calm of someone that doesn't live there anymore. I finished my water and I left, and I drove home and I made dinner and I called my sister. That was the day I knew it was really over.
Part 6. What happened after? Naomi's divorce was finalized 5 months after that conversation in the living room. She kept the apartment. It was in her name, and she had been paying the majority of the rent for 3 years, which her attorney established clearly. Ryan moved in with Priya. The timeline of events, once it became known among their mutual social circle, did not reflect well on either of them. Not because Naomi said anything, but because people who know 2 people for years have a way of reconstructing a timeline when given enough adjacent information. Several of the friends they had shared chose Naomi. Not dramatically, not in a declaration, just gradually. the way water finds its level. Priya's friends, the ones who had known Naomi separately, mostly faded from both their lives. Naomi, as of the Threads post, was 18 months out from the divorce. She had, in that time, changed cities, something she had wanted to do for years but had let sit in the category of someday. She was working as a senior editor at a publication she respected. She had adopted a cat named Sutton. She had gone on 3 good dates with 2 people she was cautiously interested in. She ended her post with something that is, I think, the emotional center of the whole story. Everyone asked me why I didn't blow it up, why I didn't confront them, expose them, make a scene. And honestly, I think it's because I understood something pretty early. Their relationship is built on what they did. They have to live inside it. That's not nothing. I get to start clean. That's not nothing either. That post got 810,000 likes. The comment with the most engagement said, "She went to the wedding for her, not for them, not to make a point, for herself. This woman is operating on a frequency most of us will never reach." Under it, Naomi replied, "I cried in the car on the way there. I'm not on a frequency. I was just done being afraid of the room." That reply got 91,000 likes. Before the final word, I just want to say this directly. If you've watched all 3 of these and something in you feels cleaner somehow, like you've exhaled something you've been holding, that's what this channel is built for. These are real stories about real people who went through real things, and they came out the other side with their dignity intact. We're here every week with more of them. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. And if one of these 3 women's stories is the one that's going to be living in your head tomorrow morning, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Okay, let's close this out. What all 3 stories are really about. 3 completely different situations, 3 completely different women, 3 completely different outcomes. And here's what is interesting, genuinely interesting when you hold them together. Camille felt everything and still made the right call. She cried on the closet floor for 45 minutes. She was not composed. She was not strategic. She was a person in genuine pain. And then she got up and made one clear decision and left cleanly. The grief came first. The clarity came after. Diane was patient beyond what most people could sustain. 9 years of watching, learning, building quietly, asking nothing out loud, waiting for the moment her preparation would matter. She is proof that the long game is not just for people who are cold. It's for people who are smart enough to understand that not every battle is won in the moment it starts. Naomi did the thing that is the hardest of all 3. She walked into the room she had the most reason to avoid. She did not blow it up. She did not perform. She showed up, stayed long enough to prove to herself that she was free, and left. She gave neither of the people who had hurt her the satisfaction of her pain or the drama of her anger. She gave them nothing except a woman in a beautiful outfit who finished her water and went home and made dinner. What these 3 stories share is not a strategy. It is not a type. It is a moment, a specific, personal, interior moment where a woman stopped organizing her life around a man's perception of her and started organizing it around her own. The grief was real in all 3 cases. The anger was real. The loss was real. But so was the decision. And the decision was, I am not going to let the worst thing that happened to me be the last thing that defines me. As for the men in these stories, they are living right now with the lives they built. Derek sat alone at a table for 2 at a restaurant that was meant to be a beginning. Thomas opened a settlement document and saw a number he didn't know existed. Ryan is inside a relationship built in the shadow of everything he did to get there. None of them were confronted dramatically.
None of them were destroyed publicly. None of them were given the satisfaction of being the center of a scene. They were simply, cleanly, completely left behind. And the women who left them? One is running her own studio, named after her mother. One cried in her car on the way to a wedding she attended for herself, and then made dinner. One found the ring on a Sunday, made a decision by Monday, and never looked back. That's how this ends. That's how it always ends, when you finally decide that your own clarity matters more than someone else's comfort. 3 stories. 3 women I have so much respect for. Not because they were perfect, not because they didn't hurt, but because they decided, and then they kept going. If you stayed all the way to the end of this, thank you, genuinely. Leave a comment and tell me which moment got you. Was it the ring in the closet? The $40,000 her husband never knew about? Naomi finishing her water and going home? Tell me, I want to know. And come back next week. There's always another story. There's always someone who kept going when they had every reason not to. This is Venture and Karma.